Welcome to Let's Talk Climate. We're glad you're here today. I'm Deneen Powell, your host and ecoAmerica's Path to Positive Program Director. Today on Let's Talk Climate, we're talking about climate safe neighborhoods, a partnership of Groundwork USA. Groundwork USA and its network of trusts across the US engage everyday people and communities to tangibly improve their environment, economic, and social conditions to increase the likelihood of upward mobility and improve health and overall quality of life. The Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership is an excellent example of climate justice at work. The partnership brings together 9 groundwork trusts to explore the relationship between historical race-based housing segregation and the current and predicted impacts of climate change. Additionally, the Climate Safe Neighborhoods site focuses on people and projects in communities all across the country that are adapting and mitigating the climate crisis while also creating sustainable communities and systematic changes. And with that, I would like to introduce Cate Mingoya, Director of Capacity Building at Groundwork USA. Welcome, Cate.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Before we begin, I make my home near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I reside on the unceded land of the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Algonquin tribes. I ask you to join me in acknowledging this region's diverse and vibrant Native peoples who show strength and resilience amidst a backdrop of continuing oppression. Let this acknowledgement demonstrate our commitment to dismantling the ongoing legacies of colonialism. Cate, it's so good to have you here with us. Thank you so much for being with us. In my introduction, I briefly touched on the purpose of the Climate Safe Neighborhood Partnership, which is to explore the relationship between historical race-based housing segregation and the current and predicted impacts of climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of Climate Safe Neighborhood Partnerships and a little bit about the participating trusts? And while you're at it, you may want to explain what a trust is, because I don't do a very good job at that at all.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me here. I work with Groundwork USA, which is the national support organization for 22 people-centered environmental justice nonprofits across the country. We're everywhere from San Diego to Yonkers, New York to Milwaukee, where you're located. And the trusts focus on a couple areas. One is to take contaminated lands and transform them into community assets like parks and trails and urban farms, work closely with youth to get them skills in urban agriculture, in green infrastructure, all sorts of great things to prepare them for jobs that are sustainable in the future, and a variety of other projects, everything from setting up places for people to learn how to ride bicycles and fix those bicycles, to partnering with public housing agencies to add green infrastructure. So these trusts are all independent nonprofits, and that means they have very deep community roots. Some of them have been working in communities to make tangible change for 20 years. Youth might come in as young folks who are 13, 14 years old and end up working there later. So there's a really close and deep partnership, and our work would not work without that partnership and with that deep relationship. So Climate Safe Neighborhoods kicked off years ago, about 5 years ago, through a partnership between Groundwork Richmond, Virginia, we call it Groundwork RVA, and the Science Museum of Richmond, Virginia, where they were exploring the urban heat island effect across Virginia. And they had a whole bunch of youth and community members travel around on bicycles and on cars, measuring the temperature on the same hot day in August. And they found that there were pretty dramatic differences between which neighborhoods were the hottest and which neighborhoods were cooler on those days. And it's the same city on the same day at the same time. Why would there be huge differences? So we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that and understand, hey, it doesn't just look like this in Richmond. We see something similar in Milwaukee, in San Diego, in Dallas. Why do our neighborhoods look the way that they do? And we found that they don't look the way that they do by accident, which means they're not going to change by accident. So we use historical race-based housing segregation maps known as redlining maps that the federal government had used during the New Deal to assess who was eligible for home loans. Areas that had Black and brown folks, people who were not considered white, but maybe are considered white now because that definition changes, were outlined in red or redlined, and they were denied access to mortgages. we found through our research, and actually the research of Jeremy Hoffman and Vivek Chandas, that if you look at redlining maps and you look at the land surface temperature in communities across the country, on average, formerly redlined neighborhoods are about 4.5 degrees hotter on the same summer day, but that difference can be as high as 20 degrees Fahrenheit. And I want you to think about what that means functionally. If you are in a location that is 20 degrees hotter than somewhere else in town, that's the difference between you turning on your air conditioner and not. That's the difference between you going outside and enjoying an afternoon with your kids at the park and ending up in the hospital for heat stroke. So there are really huge economic and social differences to experiencing heat differently. And we find that neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown are ones that are disproportionately hotter than neighborhoods that are whiter and wealthier. So we want to understand exactly why do our neighborhoods look like this and what does it mean to change that? So our Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership, which now has 13 trusts across the country, pulls together residents over 3 years. The first year is focused on understanding why our neighborhoods look the way that they do. The second year is working closely with residents to help them prioritize the change that they would like to see in their community. And then the third year is getting residents to build their capacity to intervene in decision-making processes and systems so that they can self-advocate for a more equitable distribution of resources. There's no panacea, there's no 100% magic wand that we're going to be able to wave to solve issues of racial injustice, to solve issues of climate inequity. Instead, we're looking for a bunch of 1% local solutions or even 0.001% solutions. So that's a little bit about our climate safe neighborhoods. And we've had really tremendous successes everywhere from Elizabeth, New Jersey, which works really beautifully with the mayor now to get tree canopy cover more equitably distributed around Elizabeth, New Jersey, to the folks in San Diego who had a huge win getting the Choyas Creek watershed, which is prone to flooding, designated as public infrastructure. So now they can get money to make the changes to that built environment so flash flooding isn't sweeping away people's cars and furniture anymore. So those are just like two small examples, but we've got really great ones across the whole network.
Well, that's really great. I've actually been, I think, to the Choyas Creek, their Earth Lab there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Amazing. It really is. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little more about climate justice. When I think of climate justice and I think about kind of like the principles of climate justice, the one that I felt immediately rang true to me when thinking about climate safe neighborhoods is sharing the benefits and burdens equitably. And that's the benefits and burdens of the climate crisis and climate solutions, which is really where what I'm getting at here. And I know that climate safe neighborhood projects have a great deal of impact on the communities that they're in. Can you share a little bit about what the projects may look like and what that climate solution, how that climate solution benefits the community? That it's in. And then let's take it a step further. And this is more of a dream. Let's dream together, Cate.
Okay.
What would additional funding, like federal funding, do for these and others like them?
Absolutely. So I think that there's a couple ways to talk about it. The first one is to create a framework that shows why these systemic changes to the built environment are necessary. Why do we want to change the decision-making process? Why do we want to have certain types of green infrastructure projects put into certain neighborhoods? So redlining as a practice was outlawed in 1968. And although it still goes on today, like it's really insidiously, it still happens, but technically it was outlawed in 1968, but we never actually addressed the harm that it did. People who were living in these communities that were intentionally segregated, and redlining didn't cause segregation, it just codified municipal segregation that was legal at the time. When people were kept from leaving their communities to move to different neighborhoods, when they lacked the political power because of their race or their income to demand that things like parks or trees or even updated sewage infrastructure be put into their neighborhoods, that's a really concrete harm that we still feel the resonance of today. The projects that we do through our climate safe neighborhoods are twofold. We do a series of demonstration projects to show people that change is possible. One of the really common things, and I know that this is a problem in Milwaukee as well, is basement flooding. I think when we talk about flooding in our culture, we think about like really dramatic, like a huge wave comes through and washes someone's car away. And that happens in places. But basement flooding is a huge pain. It destroys your stuff in the basement. It makes your drywall moldy. It can be really expensive to fix water damage in anybody's home. And so we talk about that all the time and say, well, what are different ways that we can help to protect your home? Well, let's plant some trees.
A person who has a limited income, for example,
Hmm.
Groundwork Milwaukee, they actually did clean outs in basements.
Mm,
Large flooding, I think it was 2010. And a lot of elderly folks on limited or
yeah.
fixed incomes that simply didn't have $2,000 to hire somebody to come in and pull, 40 years
Hmm.
worth of stuff out of the basement and dry everything out.
Absolutely.
So instead
Or if
they
you're,
made that, which creates health issues, or
it does.
with themselves. It can be quite devastating.
It does. And if you're a renter too, being able to afford to pick up and move while a remediation happening is going to be prohibitively expensive. Or how do you just replace all that stuff that you had in the basement? How do you protect your kids by having them breathe clean air if there's mold in the drywall?
Yeah, exactly.
So we try to look for, again, some of those 1% solutions because there's no really big magic wand that we're going to wave and say like, cool, we're done with flooding now. But looking at different ways to protect people's homes and get them involved in the process. So one, that they know that change is possible. Two, they have a hand in creating that change, and that helps to create an attachment to that project and helps to encourage long-term stewardship, taking care of that tree, making sure that the sediment is flushed out of their rain barrels, things like that. So we do a bunch of small demonstration projects to get people involved. But we also work on a larger mission, which is getting cities to change the way that they handle different challenges of the climate crisis in low-income neighborhoods. Things like the heat island effect, or a really good example is combined sewer overflows. Working with in Elizabeth, that was in Elizabeth, New Jersey. One of the first projects they worked on through Climate Safe Neighborhoods was to pull together a task force to work with the city to change the way in which they dealt with combined sewer overflow because they were getting sewage into the streets in some of these neighborhoods. So we're approaching things on a very tangible, roll up your sleeves, get a shovel and plant things, but then also looking at changing the way that decisions are made, who's at the table, how does the funding get distributed, so that we can deal with issues that residents have prioritized as something that's really bothersome to them. I think that if we were to be able to get more funding into this work, we would be able to support the cities in upgrading municipal infrastructure. So there's so many amazing people who are working at the municipality. They really care about their cities. They really want to do the right thing, but their hands are tied because they don't have enough money. One of the things that really surprised me in this work is you would think that like all cities know where the sewers are or like what the pipes are under the ground, but they don't. There's a lot of information that's missing. So folks at the city that want to do the right thing aren't able to intervene. So greater funding for greater technical expertise, for construction, for the installation of green infrastructure, and for the preservation of natural types of infrastructure like wetlands would go a huge way in saving lives, would go a huge way towards social healing, and then also towards that racial healing. I mentioned that redlining was outlawed in 1968. We are still suffering the repercussions of systemically racist practices that the federal government did, that local municipalities did, that individuals did today. And we have not healed from that. And I don't think that we will until we're able to have equity, not just in the resources that people have, but in how safe they are. It's unfair that somebody can be pushed into a cardiac event because their neighborhood is 20 degrees hotter because of the lottery of birth, where they were born, the skin color that they were born with, as compared to if they were born on the other side of town in an area that was green lined or had access to those. One other last thing that I'll say is what we rely really heavily on data. And using a data informed practice. We use a lot of maps in conversations. And one thing that I really loved was in Denver, Colorado, in the Globeville, Elaria, Swansea neighborhood, which is in the northwest part of the city. Residents were looking around in the map and they found on these maps that the neighborhood that they were in had a 1% tree canopy cover. But if they got on the number 42 or 47 bus and took the bus across the river to a formerly green lined neighborhood, there was 67% tree canopy cover in that neighborhood. So like 1% to 67%. And they were able to name, that's a really clear measure for equity. Take that federal funding, put it into creating a tree canopy cover in those places that have been disinvested, but that have a lot of people who are in need.
Yeah. Well, and I think it benefits everyone, right?
Yeah.
If everybody's healthier, if everybody's cooler, if there's more trees,
Mm-hmm.
all benefit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So could you please tell us a little bit about the long-term goals of the Climate Safe
Mhm.
Neighborhood Project and some of the sites? What do you hope to accomplish in the next few years, Kate? Where is the project going? There's so many moving parts. You have
Yeah.
trusts, the independent trusts involved.
Mhm. Gosh, well, the long-term goals, we have sort of medium long and then long goals. I think that the medium long goals are to get communities to change the way in which they make decisions. Residents are often intentionally or unintentionally left out of processes where tax funding, so funding that people are putting money into, gets distributed, and doing things like having advisory councils that maybe can tell the local government what they want but don't have any decision making power isn't super helpful. So we're interested in changing that so that residents have an actual seat at the table that allows them to have decision-making authority and power over the way in which these resources are distributed. So that's one of our medium to long-term goals. I would say long-term goals is to be able to remove ourselves from the capacity building equation. I think ideally it would be wonderful to build resident capacity around community organizing, in understanding how government works. Like, government is so unclear. It is so unclear, like, who owns what parcel, who has authority or jurisdiction over what area, and being able to make that something that's clear and accessible so that when residents have an issue, be it related to climate or not, they understand how to intervene in the systems that are making these decisions. So we have one that's really focused around climate as a medium longish term goal. And then I think our long term goal is for residents to be able to take what they've learned, take these tools and intervene if they want a stop sign, if they need the sidewalk fixed, if they want their neighborhoods to not be so hot. We want residents to have that power to work hand in hand with partners who I think on the whole are really open to working with residents, but for a variety of reasons are unable to or not willing to.
I think that that's great. The empowerment piece is so important. And again,
Mhm.
I've mentioned climate justice, and I think that that's another one of the principles is this idea of
Mhm.
empowerment through education, through experience, so that we are making informed decisions as community members,
Yep.
about our community, and we're working for our community. And again, it just makes
Yeah.
more.
I agree, and I think that, like, one of the things I want to be clear about is that low-income communities, communities of color, have always had really robust histories of organizing, and have always worked really closely together to create something out of the absence of resources that they've had access to, and then there's a really great power. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that we're like discovering that we're like discovering organizing, or we're discovering we just have the resources to be able to pull people together and help to focus that energy that they've been building for a really long time already, into something that can get them the change that they would like to see. Ideally, it would be great if we didn't need to exist and there was already systems to do that. But there's really wonderful people who've been doing this work for generations in communities of color, in low-income communities, and we still have so much that we're learning from them, and in ways in which we're able to share information so that we can all empower each other towards these goals.
Incredible, incredible work. Okay, so moving on, we have a lot of folks in our audience are already working in this sector.
Mm,
They are what we refer to as green verticals. So it's organizations that are
mhm.
environmental work and sustainability work and
Yep.
climate work, mitigation, adaptation, you name it, they're doing it. So this question is for them, I guess. What lessons have you learned about working with communities through the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Initiative that could be applied to other organizations doing similar work?
Yeah, I think that our biggest finding, and this one shocked me. If you told me 4 years ago, like, Kate, this is going to happen, I would have said, you're lying. Come back to me later. But how much data can depersonalize complex and loaded conversations about the climate crisis and about race, that really shocked me. So one of the things that we use and rely on really heavily in our climate work is are those maps that I talked about. Well, actually, I don't know if anybody in the audience remembers acetate transparencies or overhead projectors. If you're like under 25, you have no idea what I'm talking about. It's basically a square of clear plastic. And you can print that out. You can print out the different layers. So you can go door to door and say, like, hey, Mrs. Jones, this is our neighborhood. Like, here's your house. Cool. Let's overlay this redlining map. Oh, this neighborhood was redlined. Here's what that means. Let me overlay the tree canopy cover. Gosh, there's not a lot of trees here. Where do you notice there are the trees? Let's look at heat. Let's look at pavement. Let's look at flood risk, and can sort of build this narrative and this conversation. And it takes out the personalization that I think happens a lot in conversations about racial justice in our community. I think like one of the really big misunderstandings is that if we're talking about racial justice, we're talking about what you as an individual have done wrong on this earth. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about systemic frameworks and the ways in which certain people are prioritized and deprioritized. And I have been shocked that these maps have moved the conversation from you versus me, my opinion versus your opinion, to one that is, gosh, our city has a problem. Our shared community has a gap in access to resources. What can we do to fix it? So we've definitely spoken with folks who don't believe that systemic racism exists. And actually, people in my own family who live in one of the neighborhoods that we have a Groundwork Trust have looked at these maps that don't believe that racial justice, that like systemic racism is a thing, and don't believe this or climate crisis is a real thing. Look at these maps and are moved towards equity. Are we getting them there and like completely changing their mind that the climate crisis is real and that systemic racism exists? No, but we're getting them to focus on the fact that there is a disparity. This data brings up some really uncomfortable questions that are uncomfortable but not personal. Why does our neighborhood look like this? It's not because of you didn't do it, but you can't not see that it looks different. So what are we going to do to fix it? And that has been really wild for me. And I think that it allows residents to build their own story and see their lived experience written in the data. Like everybody knows the areas that are hot. Like pretty much anyone who's walked down like a Martin Luther King Boulevard in any city knows that that block is going to be real hot. Like Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine, it's going to be hot. And residents know that. But being able to see that and have that confirmed can be really powerful. And it also adds on extra power to the qualitative anecdotes. Ideally, we would live in a world where residents could say, hey, my basement is flooding all the time and my stuff is getting ruined. What can you do? But it's really hard for governments, municipalities to act on that information. But if you're able to bring data, if you're able to bring these questions, if you're able to understand the system, you can pair that qualitative data and in some cases that quantitative data, how many neighborhoods are flooding, how many homes have been flooded in this last rainstorm, and then put that to higher level data that then gives or opens up a pathway towards change. We now understand that we want to see an X% reduction or an X% increase. We know that we want this part of the map to look the same as this part of the map. Because there's a big question, why is the northeastern part of X city, where all the Latino people live, have no trees, whereas the southern part that's wealthier and whiter has a lot of trees, right? Like those are really uncomfortable questions, but they're not personal. And I never thought that we would be able to depersonalize conversations about the climate crisis and about racial justice. So that's my like biggest surprise and biggest lesson learned. Don't get all wonky on people, but using data as an opportunity to serve as a platform for equitable conversations is possible. And I encourage people to explore that as one of many tools.
I love that. So it's depersonalizing and using data and information for equitable conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could just throw one other one in there that I about as especially as it relates to the project itself, I think it's that it focuses on solutions too. It's not just a problem, but it's this is how to fix it. And that targeted universalist approach of let's figure out the solution. Let's focus on the solution and not necessarily, like you're saying, creating that personal feeling like, well, I'm not responsible for the fact that happened. That happened, 100 years ago. We're working on solutions here. We're all about
it. Yeah. And that's what I love about that's what I really love about working with Groundwork. I really love working for this organization because we are the so what to the climate bubble gut. Like if you're sitting out in the audience and you've got the bubble guts about the climate crisis, you don't know how things are going to be solved. I've got a 4-year-old and worry a lot, like I think a lot of parents do, about, am I setting her to live up in this like dystopian climate hellscape in the future? Or are we going to come out okay? And Groundwork is the so what do we do about it? And the Groundwork Trust are the so what do we do about it? And the people are the so what do we do about it? Generally, I think people tend to be solution oriented. And if you give them a platform to have those conversations and to bridge the gap between what is and what could be, really magical things can happen.
Cool. Very cool. I love that. Okay. So I have one last question, and really it's because I'm going to get a lot of calls and emails. Okay. How can I support? How can I engage with the Groundwork Network? What can I do to be a part of this? And we get that from our ambassadors and our partners here. So just tell us, what would that look like for you? What would that be? And how do they reach out?
Yeah, I think there's 3 things you can do. The first is to head to our website, usa.org, and find a trust that's near you and get involved. Reach out, share your services. If you're someone who has a skill, offer it. If you're someone who wants to help in some way, do it. If you're someone who wants to get involved in the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Partnership and show up to a community meeting or learn how to do a certain thing, like please reach out to your local trusts or to Groundwork USA. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to be in partnership with you. I think the second piece is that if there's anybody who is a funder in the office that's in the room, to focus on getting non-restrictive funding to Groundwork trusts, to Groundwork USA, but to any nonprofit organization that you're interested in that's working on these issues. The non-restricted funding allows us to do things like having these community conversations that further that vision of what our cities can look like. And it's really hard to do that without it. And then I think the other piece is to get really involved in the work, like local climate work that's happening. As I mentioned, we are not the people who are inventing community organizing. We're not the only ones that are trying to solve your case of the bubble guts over the climate crisis. So try to get involved, even if it's for a couple, hours on nights and weekends. We're all super busy, but the situation's getting really urgent and dire. I know that we can make change and we can do it with you.
Yes, we say every person every day can help in the climate crisis and come up with climate
Yes.
solutions.
I like that. Every person, every day. It's true. There's little, and again, there's no 100% solution. So don't go after that because that doesn't exist. It's not real. But if you're looking for those 0.001% solutions, places like Groundwork and the Groundwork Trusts can help you get there. And you can do that yourself in your life. And you can do that working with ecoAmerica. So there's lots of allies and partners that you can engage with if you want to have the feeling and want to be doing something. And I know that urge is real in a lot of people. You want change, but you don't know where to start. Start by chatting with us.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Cate. We are reaching the end of our time together. And I have to say, this topic has been so inspirational. Thank you so much for your leadership. And it is my hope that our discussion has inspired our listeners about progress, community engagement, and local solutions to climate change. We look forward to seeing what's next for you, Cate, and Groundwork USA and the Climate Safe Neighborhoods Project.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much for having me. Thank you, everyone.
It's been great. Engage with us online with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate, and be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. From all of us at ecoAmerica, thank you. Stay well, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.